old. You can watch the show on YouTube, X, and Facebook under the Let Me Bend Your Ear podcast. You can listen wherever you get your podcast. Please rate and review the show on your app of choice. You can email the show at bendyourearpodcast@gmail.com. Please visit the website for the podcast at letmebendyourear.com. All episodes are available there. On this episode, I'm going to review the new Martin Scorsese film, Killers of the Flower Moon. I've been looking forward to this film for quite some time. The making of the film was delayed somewhat by the pandemic, but the delays go back a little bit further than that. Let me start first with the book. So this film is based on a 2017 nonfiction book by David Gran, Killers of the Flower Moon. Now, I've actually read this book and highly recommend it. The movie takes a little bit of a different tact, and I'll get into that in a moment. But the story of the book is the true story of two things that are happening at the same time. So the main story is of the Osage Indian tribe. So the quick version of this is, this was a tribe of Indians that were located in both Kansas and Missouri. And the U.S. government basically kicked them off their land and sent them to Oklahoma. Now, they sent them to a place in Oklahoma that was pretty barren. Very, very bad. So basically, really did wrong by them, which of course is common with our history with Native Americans. So they go to this land, it's barren, they make the best of it. But in what I've called, and when I speak about this book and this movie to people, and one of the most stunning examples of karma, if you believe in that, under the land that they were forced to live on was oil. So oil was discovered under the Osage land. So of course, they became instant wealthy people. So the book points it out, and it also points it out in the movie. I said I'll get to the movie in a minute, but the book points out that the Osage population was the richest population per capita at that time in the United States. So this is in the early 1920s. So the book tells that story about the Osage people, them becoming wealthy. And what happens, of course, when you have a concentrated area with a lot of money, you get people coming in. Vultures, if you will. And that term is used literally in the film. But, of course, what ends up happening is people come in to try to, of course, make money off the wealthy Osage. And what starts to happen is you have a great deal of whites marrying into the Osage nation. So you have white men marrying Osage women to have access to the money that they have. And I'll get more into that in a minute. And the other story that the book tells is, this is at the onset of the FBI. So J. Edgar Hoover, of course, the longtime director of the FBI, was just starting this bureau at the time that what's going on in the Osage country happens. So there is a series of crimes in the Osage community, a series of murders specifically. So the book tells the story of J. Edgar Hoover, tapping Tom White as a lead investigator and sends him to Oklahoma. Tom White was a Texas Ranger, a very highly gifted investigator, and he goes down to investigate the murders. And again, I'll get into more of that with the plot of the movie, but that's what the book tackles. So it's kind of both of those stories going together. Now, the book, which is, like I said, I recommend it as a fantastic read. You get both a lot of detail of the Osage community in Oklahoma, the people that are surrounding that community, and the things that happen that lead up to the crimes that are ultimately investigated by the federal government. And then you also get a very detailed trajectory of Tom White's career, being a veteran, being in the Texas Rangers, having a brother and father who were in law enforcement, and then him ultimately being assigned to the Osage case. Like I said, great story with him, great story in the book. So the reason I brought up the book in detail before I got into the show is the movie is quite different. So the history of the movie is very interesting. So I was like I said, the movie was delayed in production wise due to the pandemic. I think somewhat. I don't think that was the main reason, but the movie was years in the making. Martin Scorsese, knew the book, wanted to adapt it and make a film out of it. So the original screenplay, which he co-wrote with Eric Roth, the screenwriter who I think he wrote Forrest Gump, many other screenplays. As they were working on the screenplay was adapted, of course, from David Grant's book and was taking the same tact that the book took. From the perspective of the two stories, like I said, you've got the Osage story, and then as David Grant's thesis of his book is, it's even in the title, in the subtitle, I don't have the book with me, but it's basically the Osage murders and the birth of the FBI. So those two things are intertwined in David Grant's book, and that's the way the screenplay was going to be based on as well, and that was the focus. So the main character in the original version of the screenplay, as is in the book, main character, if you will, is Tom White. So while the script is being made, Leonardo DiCaprio, who I ultimately found out was an executive producer on this film as well, was going to play Tom White, the FBI agent. And between interviews that I've seen with Scorsese, I don't think I've seen any interviews with DiCaprio regarding the film. But from what I've read and what I've seen as far as interviews he's given before the film came out and now that the film is out, is between DiCaprio and Scorsese and probably Eric Roth, DiCaprio read the script and had issue or took issue with the fact that it appeared that they were telling the story more from the FBI agent's perspective than from the Osage Indian perspective. So after that kind of conversation, after discussing that and how DiCaprio felt about that, he felt that in his words, for Scorsese, is that where's the heart of this script in this movie? It's missing something. Telling it from this perspective is missing something, especially when you're dealing with, Native American issues and obviously the checkered history with America and Native Americans. So ultimately, the decision was made to scrap the original script and rewrite it. So Scorsese and Eric Roth rewrote the script with the focus being on Molly Burkhart, which I'll get to her in a second. So when the script was rewritten, the main character and the story focus was going to be more on the Osage and not on Agent Tom White. So what ended up happening was DiCaprio removed himself from the role of Tom White and took on the role of Ernest Burkhart. So he stopped being the good guy and became one of the villains of the piece. So from that point, we'll start to talk about the movie. So the movie opens with Ernest Burkhart, again played by DiCaprio, coming home from World War I. He's a veteran. He comes back to Oklahoma. So the reason he is in Oklahoma is that his uncle, Mr. Hale, played by Robert De Niro, recruits him to come work with him in Oklahoma. So Hale is basically a pillar of the community there and a quote-unquote friend to the Osage Indians. So as I stated a little bit earlier when I was describing the situation, when the film opens, you get a brief history of the Osage that I explained, them being kicked off their land, sent to Oklahoma, they find oil underneath, and you have the Osage living a very affluent lifestyle for Native Americans and for anyone in the United States at that time. And then, of course, the people that it attracts. A lot of shady characters, a lot of people just looking to get rich, of course, or to try to find a way to get to that money. So again, Ernest Burkhart comes to town. His uncle, William Hale, played by Robert De Niro. Again, he's kind of the, for lack of a better term, like the mayor of the town, even though he's not really the elected official. So he's a businessman. He owns a ranch. He doesn't have, he makes it, it's funny because De Niro's performance is fantastic here. He makes it a point to tell Ernest, I don't have any oil. This land that I'm on has no oil. I'm a cattle rancher and I help the Osage. I respect them a lot. They're smart. He goes out of his way to kind of charm Ernest and to tell him how much he loves the Osage people and they're honorable people and how smart they are, and just kind of buttering them up as a way to kind of charm Ernest. So in their interactions, he ultimately has Ernest driving for people in the town. He ends up driving Molly, played by Lily Gladstone. So now Molly's story is the main. She is the main character in David Grant's book, and is put front and center in this movie. Not that she's not front and center in the book, because to me, when I read the book, she was kind of the co-lead with Tom White. So you were getting Tom White's story and Molly's story as well. So Molly has three sisters and her mother. She lives with her mother, takes care of her mother. The father had passed away a few years before. So as the movie starts, that sets that part of the story up. And Ernest starts to drive Molly around, and they form a friendship and then a relationship. So during this time, Hale is telling his nephew, "Hey, look, you may want to think about marrying one of the Osage, because, if you do that, the head rights, which at that time was the rights to their share of the oil fortune." So the way it worked, and I don't remember, it's been a couple of years since I read the book, but the way, and the movie doesn't go into it too much, they just use the term head rights, but basically what happens is the money that's generated from the oil, all the Osage that are there, that are pure Osage, have a share of that, and rights to money, to income derived from the oil. And the Osage set it up where it was only Osage that had access to it. The only way, there was two ways you'd have access to it. If you were an Osage member, child, family member, that's the only way you had access. The only other way you would have access is if you married in. And as I stated briefly a little bit earlier, this is what a lot of, specifically white men, started to do. They started to marry into the Osage community, marrying these women to have access to that money. Now, that in itself is shifty and shady, but it happens in all walks of life. Women marry rich older men, men marry rich women. This happens in all cultures. So if it was just that, it's pretty slimy in itself. But the tragedy of this story, and the movie does a good job of illustrating it. So Ernest and Molly develop their relationship, and they end up getting married. Now, the movie and the book as well gives you the impression that Ernest was truly in love with Molly. But that being said, so at the beginning of the marriage, maybe there were purer intentions, but Hales is talking in his ear his entire time, the access to money they could have. And Ernest Burkhart has two vices in the movie: drinking and gambling. And he likes money. So Hale seizes upon those weaknesses that Ernest has. And not that Ernest is absolved of responsibility, and as I explain more in the movie, you'll see. So Ernest ends up marrying Molly, and they have kids, and the story progresses there. So the real tragedy of this is what starts to happen, and the movie does a very good job in telling the story. You start to see the lengths that people will go to have access to the Osage's money. Now, this is not even just a Native American story. Obviously, this is a human story, in the sense that, unfortunately, the term "money is the root of all evil" is there for a reason. And the lengths that people will go to have access to large sums of money, not even large sums of money, but any kind of money that they don't have, people will do almost anything to do it. And what starts to occur is the deaths of Osage men and women. And the book and the movie, show these things. So there's two things that happen, or two methods of murder that occur here. Now, of course, there's the violent type, a shooting, a stabbing, things like that. And the movie portrays some of those murders as well. But as bad as that is, the more sinister thing that happens, and this is I don't know if you can call this a spoiler or not, but it's something I think it's essential for me to review this movie, to kind of give you an idea of what to expect when you see it. The other way that these were happening was there was a systematic slow poisoning of Osage tribe members, and specifically finding slow ways to kill these wives so they die what seems to be a natural death. And of course, in this town, Native Americans dying, even at the clip that they were dying in this town, was largely ignored, investigated in quotes, very, very poorly, if not at all. Because obviously, the value of a Native American life in the 1920s is going to be next to nothing. And one thing that the movie ties in with it is they show the destruction in Tulsa at that time, the race riot that occurred in Tulsa, and that's used kind of as a counterpoint to what could happen where the Osage are, and the whatever term you want to use, racism, whatever you want to use to dehumanize the Native Americans by the people who were there, one, trying to get the money, which of course creates the resentment, which I'm sure the whites had, of these Native Americans being very, very rich. So you have murders piling up and nothing being done about it. And the movie does a fantastic job of telling that story that's from the book, and that's Molly's story and Molly's family. So what you really see is the destruction of Molly's family, pretty much her entire family. And that's the main thrust of Killers of the Flower Moon. That's the main thrust of that part of the book as well. And Scorsese does a fantastic job of really making it uncomfortable to watch. As I was sitting watching the film, I was uncomfortable, but in a good way. It's so tragic and so brutal. And like I said, it's not because of violence, though there are some people that meet a violent end in the movie. It's really the destruction of a group of people who have done nothing but try to exist. And the movie paints that portrait very, very well. And it's very brutal to watch in that sense, but completely riveting. And Lily Gladstone as Molly Burkhart is fantastic. It's a fantastic lead performance in that film. DiCaprio is the co-lead, I think, and you would even see it maybe sometimes a supporting role. His role as Ernest Burkhart, he's fantastic. I mean, he's always good. I think this role stands out for him because it is, and I haven't seen every DiCaprio film. I've seen a lot of them, but he is, maybe other than Django Unchained, he's truly not a good person in this film. I think he becomes an accomplice to the horrendous atrocities that are being committed against these people, and he becomes an active and willing participant of it. And he may have loved his wife at first, but he loved money and the access to it more than he ever loved his wife. And Robert De Niro as William Hale, I got to tell you this is one of his better performances in a long time. He's fantastic in this movie. It's funny because when I read the book and the Hale character, De Niro plays it perfectly. He's just a bad dude. He's a sociopath, essentially. He justifies what he does. I think his character actually believes two things. One, that he's really helping these people and that he has some sort of respect for them. But two, has no issue trying to steal their money. And I think as much as he says he respects them, he doesn't deem them as worthy to have it, which I think is what the attitude of a lot of people were at that time. So De Niro is fantastic. And like I said, Lily Gladstone, fantastic. There's a great cast in the movie. A lot of actors I haven't seen before, a couple that I have. And it's fantastic. The film is 3 hours and 25 minutes, I believe. So, of course, we go back to this conversation that I always have in every review about length of films. So I will say this, and this will come to my slight criticism of Killers of the Flower Moon. I'm not going to say the movie is too long. That wouldn't be an accurate criticism from me. So I think my issue with it, as I was watching it last night, it's riveting, it's brutal, it's uncomfortable to watch, but it should be because the story is uncomfortable, and it's a tragedy, and it's presented as such. But for me, in the last third of the film, it just lost some of its, and the way I thought of it in my head when I was watching the movie in real time, I thought it lost some narrative steam. So what that means to me is I think it wasn't the momentum that carried the film and the way it was presented. I think it slowed down. Ironically, when Tom White, the FBI agent, comes into town, not that that wasn't interesting, and how they ultimately try to bring these people to justice, but it slowed the narrative momentum, or the narrative, momentum that it had the entire time. Now, this is a minor criticism for me. It didn't derail anything. It didn't make the movie any less wonderful to me. It just slowed it down to me. So that's just my slight criticism of it. And like I said, it's very slight. You've got, like I said, great performances all the way around. The story is well told. You've got Martin Scorsese, who of course is a master American filmmaker. You've got some, you don't get that dizzying camera work that you get from Scorsese in the past. I think his last 10 years, I have to give him a lot of credit. I'm a big fan of The Irishman. I know a lot of people didn't really love it, another long movie as well, but I actually enjoyed it a lot. And I think he's just been ambitious in this later part of his career. He's definitely not just making movies to make movies. He's really taking on serious projects to tell stories with. And again, with the camera work, there was a great tracking shot going into Molly's house that's in the middle of the movie. It just stuck out to me because it was a one take kind of tracking shot, and I always think of the famous tracking shot in Goodfellas, but there was one shot in there that I loved, and there's some great cinematography in there. But again, that's not what this movie is about. It's about telling the story of the Osage people and the tragic situation that they found themselves in by forces that were looking to get their money by any means necessary. So again, it's a fantastic movie. Again, this has been a good year for me of watching movies. I've seen a lot of really, really great movies, and I know this movie had a lot of positive buzz when it came out. But again, it's a fantastic film. DiCaprio, De Niro, and Lily Gladstone all give very, very good performances. And like I said, DiCaprio's character Burkhart is not a good dude, and he is essentially attempting to murder his wife slowly so he can get her money. It's just as simple as that. Again, I don't think there's a spoiler there. I think if you even see the trailer of the film, you can kind of see where it's going to go there. But knowing that part of it is not going to ruin the experience of seeing the movie. The movie is really an observation about a period in time in America, and it really is the bigger themes too. It's man's inhumanity against man for the sake of money, and money being the root of that evil. And like I said, people willing to do anything and everything to get that money. But even more so than that, and this is the strongest part of this film, is just the absolute tragedy of families being wiped out, just like they had been wiped out over time in the Native American history in the United States. It's just a different way. It's not on a battlefield. It's not due to war. It's due to greed, and it's just as tragic and just as shameful as any of those other ways that Native Americans were harmed and killed. And the movie, like I said, it's not a fun watch, but it's an important watch, and it's entertaining in the sense that the movie is gripping and it tells that story unflinchingly. And I think the length of the movie does help that. I think it really, and I think Scorsese, in the interviews that I've seen, he made an effort. He wanted to tell their story, and he wanted to make sure that he spent the time needed to really hit the point home, and I think he does. And I think it's very effective. There are some very effective scenes in this film that really got to me when you watch what was done to these people, and it was very, very emotional in some sense, and very, very just terrible because, like I said, it's a true story. These things actually happened, and you really are. It's funny because you kind of know the history of Native Americans in this country, but when you see it presented in the way it's presented by Scorsese, it is still shocking as it should be, and sad, and doesn't make you feel good about the human condition sometimes. But grateful that we're in a different place now than we were then. But it's a story that needed to be told. It's an important story to be told. And again, I highly recommend the film. Like I said, my minor quibble is that it loses some narrative steam in that third act, but nothing that derails the film at all. And again, coming after The Irishman, this is the second film in a row from Scorsese, who is one of my favorite directors. Back to back, he's made some fantastic films, and he's continuing to do that, like I said, in an ambitious way. So definitely, if you can, check it out in a theater. This is definitely a big screen movie experience. And again, great performance by Lily Gladstone, very good performance by DiCaprio, and a really excellent performance by De Niro. His William Hale character is just a straight out villain in the worst way. He is just sociopathic, and you forget because De Niro doesn't really play those type of characters, and it's basically, you've got Taxi Driver, you've got his performance in Cape Fear. Not that you forget, but he can play a bad person very, very well, and he does it very good here, and he's a bad person in this movie. And the thing that makes it more scary, just like with any film, he's a bad person in a nice suit with a nice demeanor, very calm, always talks in a very calm tone of voice, but is responsible for a lot of destruction and death. So it's a great performance, and like I said, it's worth seeing. I'm gonna go ahead and give Killers of the Flower Moon, directed by Martin Scorsese, I'm gonna give it 4 Van Goghs out of 5, or 4 stars out of 5. Again, my minor critique withstanding, it is a great film. It's definitely one I would see again. My 4-star review indicates that it's one that I would watch again. I definitely will check it out again. Like I said, it's a hard watch. It's not a popcorn Saturday night movie, but it's an important film, and it's well done, and it tells a story that needed to be told. So after reading the book and getting that story and seeing the movie, it's great. I'm glad I got to revisit this story in a different medium, because the book is fantastic. Again, I recommend David Grant's book highly. It's fantastic, and I recommend Killers of the Flower Moon, directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, and Lily Gladstone. Again, that review is 4 stars out of 5. Thank you for listening to the show. You can follow the show on X, Instagram, YouTube, and Threads. The handle will be @BendYourEarPod. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and like the Facebook page. This is a one-man operation. If you're watching the show on Facebook, YouTube, or X and would like to support the podcast, you can click the QR code on the top left corner, or you can go to the show's X page, @BendYourEarPod, go over to the profile page, and click on the tip jar. This will help cover the cost of hosting the podcast. Thank you for listening, and have a fantastic week.